A number. A mark. A warning that has generated fear for centuries. Welcome to Now we are going to examine one of the most debated and misunderstood passages in the entire Bible, the mark of the beast and the number 666. Not conspiracy theories, not internet speculation, not political panic. We are going to walk directly through the biblical text, slowly, carefully, and in context. Most people have heard something about 666. Some believe it refers to microchips. Others believe it is a barcode, some associate it with global governments, digital currency, or future technology. But before attaching modern assumptions to an ancient text, we must ask a foundational question. What did Revelation actually say to its original audience? Here is what we will do, step by step. First, we will examine Revelation 13 in its historical setting and identify what the beast represents in the text itself. Second, we will analyze the description of the mark, where it is placed, what it signifies, and how it functions. Third, we will study the number 666 and the concept of the number of a man. Fourth, we will examine how Daniel 7 informs the imagery of Revelation. Finally, we will separate explicit biblical data from modern speculation and identify what can be responsibly affirmed. Few people realize that Revelation was written to first-century churches living under Roman authority. The imagery was not originally addressed to 21st century technology. That fact alone changes the starting point of interpretation. If we misplace the historical context, we risk misunderstanding the message. If you value long-form, text-driven biblical investigation without speculation, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps this channel continue producing careful, structured studies. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And one direct question tied to tonight's topic. Do you believe the mark of the beast is purely future, purely symbolic, or already present in some form? We begin where the text begins. Revelation 13. Revelation 13 opens with a dramatic scene. John writes, "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea." Before we discuss the mark of the number 666, we must understand this figure. The mark belongs to the beast. If the beast is misunderstood, everything that follows will be distorted. The imagery is not random. The sea, in apocalyptic symbolism, often represents chaos and the nations. In Daniel 7:4, a beast rises out of the sea, representing successive empires. Revelation deliberately echoes Daniel. The beast John sees has 10 horns and 7 heads. It resembles a leopard, has feet like a bear, and a mouth like a lion. These are direct references to the animals in Daniel's vision. John is not inventing new symbols. He is building upon established prophetic imagery. This matters because it tells us something foundational. The beast is connected to political power. In Daniel, beasts represent kingdoms. They are not individual monsters roaming the earth. They symbolize imperial systems that exercise dominion. Revelation continues that pattern. The beast in chapter 13 receives authority from the dragon, identified in Revelation 12 as Satan. The text states clearly that the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. This indicates a political authority empowered by spiritual opposition to God. Verse 3 states that one of the beast's heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but the wound was healed. The world marvels and follows the beast. This detail has generated centuries of speculation, yet the first century context must be considered. Many scholars note that after Emperor Nero's death in AD 68, rumors circulated that he would return. The Nero Redivivus myth was widespread in the Roman world. Some early Christians may have interpreted the healed wound imagery through that lens. Whether the reference is strictly to Nero or more broadly to imperial continuity, the key point remains. The beast represents oppressive political authority that demands allegiance. Verse 5 continues by stating that the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. Again, this mirrors Daniel 7, where a little horn speaks arrogant words against the Most High. The beast is not merely political, it is blasphemous. It challenges divine authority. It persecutes the saints. The text says it was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them for 42 months. This time frame echoes the symbolic period of tribulation described elsewhere in apocalyptic literature. The critical observation here is that the beast is described as a system of power that demands worship. Revelation 13:8 says that all who dwell on earth will worship it, except those whose names are written in the book of life. Worship is central. The issue is allegiance. The beast stands in opposition to God, and humanity is divided by whom they worship. Before the mark appears in the chapter, the beast is established as a blasphemous, persecuting authority empowered by Satan and functioning as an imperial power demanding loyalty. That is the narrative order. The mark cannot be understood apart from this framework. In the next part, we will examine the second beast, often called the false prophet, and how it enforces allegiance, setting the stage for the introduction of the mark itself. After introducing the beast from the sea, Revelation 13 presents a second figure rising out of the earth. This second beast is often called the false prophet later in Revelation. But in chapter 13, he is described as having two horns like a lamb and speaking like a dragon. This description is deliberate. The lamb imagery suggests imitation. In Revelation, Christ is repeatedly called the Lamb. This second beast resembles the lamb externally, but speaks with the voice of the dragon. The symbolism indicates deceptive authority, religious in appearance, satanic in source. The text states that this second beast exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. The function becomes clear. The first beast represents imperial power. The second beast functions as propaganda and enforcement. It performs signs, even calling fire down from heaven, in order to deceive those who dwell on the earth. The purpose of these signs is not spectacle for its own sake. It is persuasion. The inhabitants of the earth are urged to make an image for the beast. The concept of an image is critical. In the ancient Roman world, emperor worship was widespread. Statues of the emperor were erected in cities. Citizens were expected to offer incense as a sign of loyalty. Refusal could result in economic exclusion or persecution. Revelation's imagery fits this environment precisely. The second beast gives breath to the image, so that it might speak and cause those who would not worship the image to be killed. Whether this refers to literal statues or a symbolic representation of imperial authority, the message is consistent. Enforced allegiance. Now we arrive at the mark. Revelation 13:16 states that the second beast causes all small and great, rich and poor, free and slave to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead. This mark controls economic participation. No one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. Before we interpret the mark, we must observe its placement. The right hand and the forehead are not random body parts. In the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 6:8 instructs Israel to bind the commandments of God as a sign on the hand and as frontlets between the eyes. The imagery represents thought and action, belief and behavior. Revelation deliberately echoes that covenant language. The mark of the beast stands in contrast to the seal of God described in Revelation 7, where servants of God are sealed on their foreheads. The mark and the seal represent opposing allegiance. This parallel is crucial. Revelation consistently operates through contrast. The lamb versus the beast. The seal of God versus the mark of the beast. Worship of God versus worship of the image. The mark, therefore, is not introduced as a random technological implant. It is presented as a visible sign of allegiance in a world divided by worship. The economic restriction "no one can buy or sell" reflects real pressure experienced by early Christians. Refusal to participate in emperor worship could result in exclusion from trade guilds and marketplaces. In 1st century Asia Minor, where Revelation was addressed, economic participation was often intertwined with religious loyalty. The text reflects that lived reality. At this point, we must pause and ask the critical question that drives this entire study. Is the mark primarily symbolic of allegiance, literal in physical form, or a combination of both? The answer requires careful examination of the number itself. 666 and the phrase, "the number of a man." In the next act, we will analyze the mark directly, and then examine the meaning of the number 666 without importing modern speculation into an ancient apocalyptic text. Revelation 13:16-17 introduces the mark with precision. The second beast causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. The universality is emphasized. Social class does not exempt anyone. Wealth does not protect anyone. Political status does not protect anyone. The mark functions as a dividing line across society. The question is not economic power. It is allegiance. Before we ask whether the mark is technological, digital, symbolic, or literal, we must observe how Revelation uses symbols throughout the book. The beast itself is symbolic imagery. The dragon is symbolic imagery. The lamb, though representing Christ, is presented symbolically. The 7 heads, 10 horns, and multiple crowns are symbolic. Revelation is apocalyptic literature. It communicates theological reality through vivid imagery. That does not mean the realities are unreal. It means the mode of communication is symbolic and theological rather than photographic. The placement of the mark is the first interpretive key. The right hand and the forehead echo Deuteronomy 6-8, where Israel is commanded to bind God's law on the hand and forehead as a sign. This command was not merely about physical objects. It represented internal commitment expressed outwardly. The forehead symbolized belief and identity. The hand symbolized action and obedience. Revelation intentionally mirrors this covenant imagery. The mark of the beast is a counterfeit covenant sign. It represents belonging, not merely possession of an object, but identification with a system of worship. The contrast with Revelation 7 strengthens this interpretation. In chapter 7, the servants of God are sealed on their foreheads. That seal is not described as a visible barcode or implant. It represents divine ownership and protection. Later in Revelation 14, the 144,000 are described as having the Lamb's name and the Father's name written on their foreheads. This is covenantal language. Revelation consistently uses forehead imagery to signify allegiance. If we interpret the mark in Revelation 13 as purely technological without considering this covenant framework, we detach the symbol from its biblical roots. The mark is introduced in a worship context. Verse 15 connects refusal to worship the image with death. Verse 16 connects allegiance with economic participation. The mark is tied to worship, not simply to commerce. The economic restriction flows from worship allegiance. The phrase "so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark" reflects first-century realities. In Roman Asia Minor, trade guilds often required participation in pagan rituals. Refusing to offer incense to the emperor could result in exclusion from commerce. Revelation's original audience lived under that pressure. The mark imagery communicates forced conformity within an imperial system that demands ultimate loyalty. Another important detail is that the mark is described as either the name of the beast or the number of its name. This suggests identification with the beast's identity, not merely possession of a device. In ancient culture, a name represented authority and character. To bear the name meant to belong to the system represented by that name. At Tistake, the textual evidence suggests that the mark functions as a sign of allegiance within a system of enforced worship. The economic dimension reinforces the pressure. but does not redefine the symbol as purely financial. The retention question now becomes sharper. If the mark is tied to allegiance and identity, what does the number 666 represent? Is it a code, a name, a symbol of imperfection? In the next part, we will analyze the number itself carefully, beginning with the phrase, "Let the one who has understanding calculate." Revelation 13:18 introduces the number with deliberate emphasis. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. This verse is crucial because it tells the reader how to approach the number. It calls for calculation, not speculation. It calls for understanding, not panic. The Greek term used implies reasoning or computation. John expects his audience to be able to decode the reference. In the ancient world, letters often carried numerical value. This practice, known as gematria in Hebrew and isopsophy in Greek, assigned numbers to letters. Names could therefore be represented numerically. When Revelation says the number is the number of a man, it strongly suggests that the number corresponds to a specific name. This does not automatically mean a modern political figure. It means that within the linguistic system of the time, the number could represent an identifiable person. One of the most widely discussed interpretations in scholarship connects 666 to Nero Caesar, when the name Nero Caesar is written in Hebrew characters, and the numerical values of those letters are added. The total equals 666. There is even a textual variant in some ancient manuscripts that reads 616 instead of 666. When the Latinized version of Nero Caesar is whose, the calculation equals 616. This suggests that early readers were aware of the numerical connection and preserved both forms depending on linguistic spelling. This historical detail matters because it situates Revelation within its first century context. Nero was infamous for persecuting Christians. He was associated with cruelty and imperial arrogance. The Nero Redivivus legend claimed he would return after death. Revelation 13's imagery of a wounded head that seemed to recover may reflect this cultural backdrop. If 666 originally pointed to Nero or to the spirit of imperial tyranny embodied in Nero, then the number functioned as coded resistance literature for persecuted believers. However, the interpretation is not limited to a single individual. Revelation often uses specific historical reference to communicate broader theological truths. The beast may represent not only Nero, but the entire system of imperial opposition to God. The number 666, then, could signify a human ruler embodying rebellious authority. There is also symbolic significance in the number itself. In biblical numerology, 7 often represents completeness or perfection. 6 falls short of 7. Repeated 3 times, 666 could symbolize intensified incompleteness or ultimate human imperfection. This does not replace the gematria interpretation, it complements it. The number may function both as coded identification and as theological symbol. The key observation is that Revelation invites calculation rooted in the first century world. It does not instruct readers to scan barcodes or analyze digital implants. It invites understanding within a linguistic and historical framework accessible to its original audience. At this point, the question deepens. Does the mark function purely as first-century imperial allegiance? Or does Revelation present a pattern that extends beyond Rome? In the next part, we will examine how Revelation layers immediate historical reference with enduring prophetic pattern. If 666 plausibly refers to Nero Caesar within a first-century context, the next question is unavoidable. Does that mean the prophecy was exhausted in the Roman Empire? Or does Revelation present a pattern that transcends a single historical figure? The answer requires careful attention to how apocalyptic literature functions. Revelation addresses real churches in Asia Minor under real Roman pressure. However, it also presents recurring theological patterns that extend beyond one emperor. The beast in Revelation 13 is described with imagery drawn directly from Daniel 7. In Daniel, successive empires are portrayed as beasts rising from the sea: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and a fourth terrifying kingdom. Each beast represents imperial power that opposes God's people. Revelation collapses these images into one composite beast. This suggests that the beast is not merely one man, but the culmination of oppressive imperial systems throughout history. Nero may represent the immediate embodiment, but the pattern is larger than Nero. This layered pattern explains why Revelation's imagery feels both historical and future-oriented. In the first century, emperor worship required visible acts of loyalty. Participation in trade guilds often involved ritual acknowledgement of Caesar as Lord. Refusal could lead to economic exclusion or worse. The mock imagery captured that reality. It was not about invisible technology. It was about visible allegiance within a totalizing political religious system. However, Revelation also portrays the beast as empowered directly by the dragon and exercising global influence. The language escalates beyond a single provincial governor. The beast is allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them. Authority is given over every tribe and people and language and nation. This universal language suggests a pattern that can manifest repeatedly in history whenever political power demands ultimate loyalty in opposition to God. The mark, therefore, operates within that pattern. It signifies participation in a system that substitutes allegiance to God with allegiance to a rebellious authority. In Rome, that system was emperor worship. Eras, it may take different forms. The essential feature remains constant: enforced identification with the power structure that claims ultimate loyalty. Another important observation concerns contrast. Revelation repeatedly presents two marks, though only one is called a mark. In chapter 7, the servants of God are sealed. In chapter 14, they bear the Lamb's name. In chapter 13, the followers of the beast receive its mark. The book does not describe neutral ground. Humanity is divided by allegiance. The mark is not introduced as a technological trap accidentally received. It is connected to worship and conscious participation. This observation significantly reframes modern fears. Revelation does not depict unsuspecting people accidentally receiving the mark through routine economic activity. The context is worship and allegiance. The mark identifies those who willingly align with the beast's authority. That does not remove seriousness. It clarifies the nature of the decision. At these days, the interpretive trajectory becomes clearer. The mark had immediate meaning for first-century believers under Roman imperial pressure. It also represents an enduring pattern of coerced allegiance throughout history. The number 666 likely carried specific historical coding while simultaneously symbolizing intensified human rebellion. In the final part of this master act, we will consolidate these findings and state precisely what can be affirmed about the mark in 666 without speculation. We can now consolidate what Revelation 13 actually says about the mark and the number 666, separating textual data from modern assumptions. First, the mark is introduced in a worship context. It is not introduced in a technological context. The chapter builds progressively. The dragon empowers the beast. The beast demands worship. The second beast enforces worship. An image is erected, and refusal to worship leads to exclusion or death. Only then does the mark appear. This narrative order matters. The mark is not random. It is the visible sign of allegiance within a system that demands ultimate loyalty. Second, the placement of the mark on the forehead or right hand echoes Old Testament covenant imagery. In Deuteronomy 6, Israel is commanded to bind God's law on hand and forehead. In Revelation 7 and 14, the servants of God are sealed on their foreheads. Revelation deliberately creates a contrast between divine seal and beastly mark. The imagery signals ownership and identification. It speaks the language of covenant and loyalty. Third, the number 666 is explicitly described as the number of a man and something that can be calculated. In the first century world, names could be represented numerically. The Nero Caesar calculation fits historically and linguistically within that framework. The existence of a 616 manuscript variant strengthens the connection because it aligns with alternate spellings of Nero's name. This does not prove that Nero exhausts the meaning, but it strongly supports a first-century referent accessible to John's audience. Fourth, Revelation uses symbolic numbers consistently. 7 represents completeness. 12 represents covenantal fullness. The repetition of 6 3 times likely carries symbolic weight. 6 falls short of 7. Tripled 6 may emphasize intensified human imperfection or counterfeit completeness. The beast presents itself as ultimate authority, but falls short of divine perfection. Fifth, the economic restriction. No one can buy or sell reflects real pressure experienced by early Christians. In Roma Asia Minor, participation in commerce often required public acknowledgement of imperial authority. Revelation's audience would have recognized the imagery immediately. The mark was not abstract. It described the lived tension between faithfulness to Christ and survival within an imperial economy. At this point, we can responsibly affirm the following. The mark of the beast represents visible allegiance to a political religious system that opposes God and demands worship. The number 666 likely encoded a first-century imperial figure, most plausibly Nero, while also symbolizing the broader pattern of human rebellion, elevated to divine pretension. The imagery operates within apocalyptic symbolism, but refers to real historical pressures. What we cannot responsibly affirm from Revelation 13 alone is that the mark is explicitly a barcode, a microchip, digital currency, or a specific 21st century technology. The text does not describe a device. It describes allegiance. It does not describe accidental participation. It describes conscious worship alignment. Any modern application must first pass through the historical and literary context. The retention question now becomes sharper. If the mark represents allegiance within an imperial system, how does Daniel 7 shape our understanding of beast imagery and recurring empire patterns? In the next Master Act, we will step back into Daniel's vision and trace how Revelation builds directly upon it, ensuring that our interpretation remains anchored in Scripture rather than speculation. To understand Revelation 13 properly, we must step back 6 centuries before John wrote on the island of Patmos. The imagery of the beast does not originate in Revelation. It originates in Daniel 7. Without Daniel, Revelation's symbolism becomes unstable. With Daniel, the structure becomes clear. Daniel 7 describes a vision in which 4 great beasts rise from the sea. The sea again represents chaos among the nations. The first beast resembles a lion with eagle's wings. The second resembles a bear. The third resembles a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. The fourth is described as terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong, with iron teeth and 10 horns. Each beast represents a kingdom. Daniel himself is told that these 4 great beasts are for kings, who shall arise out of the earth. This interpretive key is decisive. In biblical apocalyptic literature, beasts represent empires. They are not fantasy creatures roaming independently. They are symbolic representations of political power structures. Historically, these kingdoms are commonly identified as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. The 4th beast, the most terrifying, corresponds to the Roman Empire in many traditional interpretations. Revelation 13 deliberately combines features of these beasts. John's beast is like a leopard, with feet like a bear and a mouth like a lion. This is not accidental. It suggests continuity. Revelation is portraying the final expression of the same pattern. Daniel saw centuries earlier imperial systems that oppose God and persecute his people. Daniel 7 also introduces a little horn that arises among the 10 horns of the 4th beast. This horn speaks great and blasphemous words against the Most High and persecutes the saints. The parallels with Revelation 13 are unmistakable. The beast in Revelation also speaks blasphemies and makes war on the saints. The time frame of a time, times, and half a time in Daniel corresponds symbolically to the 42 months in Revelation. These connections anchor Revelation's imagery in an established prophetic framework. This matters because it prevents isolated interpretation. The beast is not introduced in Revelation as a new invention disconnected from previous scripture. It is the continuation of a prophetic pattern of empire opposing God's rule. The mark, therefore, must be interpreted within that pattern. It is connected to participation in a system that embodies rebellious authority. Daniel's vision does not stop with beasts. After the terrifying fourth beast dominates, the scene shifts. Thrones are set in place. The Ancient of Days takes his seat. Judgment is rendered. The beasts are stripped of dominion. Then one like a son of man comes with the clouds of heaven and is given everlasting authority. The empires rise and fall, but divine sovereignty prevails. This shift is crucial. The beastly empires appear dominant, but they are temporary. Their power is permitted for a limited time. The ultimate authority belongs to God and to the Son of Man. Revelation mirrors this pattern. The beast receives authority, but it is given authority. Its time is measured. Its defeat is certain. At this stage, a structural observation emerges. Revelation 13 is not predicting the sudden appearance of a random future figure disconnected from history. It is portraying the culmination of a recurring pattern. Imperial systems demanding ultimate allegiance. Nero may have embodied this pattern in John's day. Other regimes may reflect it in later centuries. The pattern persists. In the next part, we will examine the role of the little horn in Daniel, and how that figure clarifies whether Revelation's beast represents a single individual, a system, or both. In Daniel 7, the most detailed focus is not on the first three beasts, but on the fourth. This fourth beast is described as different from all the others, terrifying, exceedingly strong. With iron teeth and bronze claws, it devours, breaks in pieces, and stamps what remains with its feet. Among its 10 horns, another horn arises, a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns are uprooted. This little horn has eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. The text explicitly states that it speaks words against the Most High and wears out the saints. This detail is essential. The little horn is both individual and systemic. It arises from within the fourth beast, which represents an empire. It embodies the arrogance and hostility of that empire. It is not disconnected from the political structure. It emerges from it. This dual dynamic individual expression within a broader imperial system helps clarify Revelation's beast imagery. In Daniel, the little horn persecutes the saints for a time, times, and half a time. This symbolic time frame corresponds to a limited period of oppression. Revelation 13 uses a similar time frame of 42 months. The connection suggests continuity rather than novelty. The beast in Revelation appears to function like Daniel's little horn, a concentrated expression of imperial arrogance and blasphemy. Historically, many interpreters have identified the fourth beast as Rome. Within that framework, the little horn can represent a specific ruler within the Roman system. For first-century Christians, Nero fit that description closely. He persecuted believers and demanded loyalty. The language of blasphemous speech and persecution would have resonated deeply with communities under Roman authority. However, Daniel's vision also emphasizes that the beastly kingdoms represent recurring patterns of human empire. The symbolism transcends a single ruler. Babylon fell. Persia fell. Greece fell. Rome eventually fell. Each empire embodied pride, power, and resistance to divine authority. The pattern repeats across history. This pattern-based reading helps explain Revelation's structure. John does not merely describe a political leader. He describes a beast empowered by the dragon, supported by a propagandistic second beast, and worshipped by the world. The imagery amplifies Daniel's pattern into a final climactic expression. Whether that climax refers exclusively to the Roman Empire or extends into future manifestations is debated. What is clear is that Revelation does not detach itself from Daniel's imperial framework. Another crucial element in Daniel 7 is the heavenly courtroom scene. After the little horn speaks arrogantly and persecutes the saints, the Ancient of Days sits in judgment. The beast is slain, and its body destroyed. Authority is transferred to the one like a son of man. This scene establishes a theological constant. Beastly empires are temporary. Their authority is permitted, but not ultimate. Divine judgment is decisive. This theological constant must shape our understanding of the mark. If the beast represents imperial systems demanding ultimate loyalty, then the mark signifies participation in that system. It is not arbitrary. It aligns with Daniel's recurring theme. Empires that exalt themselves against God demand allegiance that belongs only to the Most High. In the next part, we will examine how this pattern applies beyond Rome, and whether Revelation anticipates recurring manifestations of the beast throughout history. When Daniel describes successive beastly empires, he is not merely forecasting isolated political transitions. He is revealing a theological pattern about human power. Each empire rises with strength, consolidates authority, expands influence, and eventually exalts itself in arrogance. Each, in different ways, resists divine sovereignty. The beasts are not only geopolitical entities, they are manifestations of human rebellion institutionalized at scale. This pattern did not end with Babylon. It did not end with Persia, Greece, or Rome. Empires throughout history have displayed similar traits: centralized authority, enforced ideological conformity, persecution of dissent, and claims to ultimate allegiance. Daniel's vision provides a template rather than a one-time code. Revelation builds upon that template. When Revelation 13 presents a beast empowered by the dragon, speaking blasphemies and demanding worship, it is intensifying Daniel's pattern. The beast is described as receiving authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. That language exceeds the geographic boundaries of first-century Rome. It signals a global scope. Whether John intended a literal single-world government or a climactic concentration of imperial opposition remains debated. What is clear is that the beast embodies the recurring structure of anti-God authority reaching its peak. This layered structure explains why interpretations of Revelation often fall into extremes. Some restrict the beast entirely to the Roman Empire of the first century, arguing that 666 referred solely to Nero, and that the prophecy was exhausted in that era. Others project the beast entirely into a distant future, disconnecting it from its original audience. The pattern-based approach avoids both extremes. It recognizes an immediate historical referent, while acknowledging a recurring theological archetype. The mark fits within this recurring structure. In Rome, allegiance to Caesar could determine economic participation. In other eras, allegiance to state ideology has similarly determined access to social and economic systems. The mark, therefore, represents more than a single historical event. It represents the visible alignment of individuals with a system that demands ultimate loyalty in place of God. Another crucial detail is that Daniel's beasts are allowed to operate for a limited time. Their authority is granted, not inherent. Revelation mirrors this language repeatedly. The beast was given authority. It was allowed to act. This passive construction underscores divine sovereignty. Even oppressive regimes operate within boundaries set by God. The beast appears dominant, but its time is measured. This perspective reframes the fear often associated with 666. Revelation does not present the beast as unstoppable or equal to God. It presents the beast as powerful yet temporary. The number 666, when understood within Daniel's pattern, signifies concentrated human rebellion, not divine equivalence. It is humanity attempting to occupy the place of God and inevitably falling short. At this stage, we are ready to consolidate the pattern. In the final part of this act, we will draw together Daniel and Revelation into a precise structural statement about what the beast and the mark represent across history. We can now bring Daniel 7 and Revelation 13 together into a coherent structural framework. Daniel presents a sequence of beastly empires rising from the Sea of Nations. Each empire embodies human authority organized at scale. Each exercises dominance. Each ultimately exalts itself. The fourth beast is especially terrifying, and from within it emerges a little horn that speaks arrogantly against God and persecutes the saints. Yet in the climax of the vision, the Ancient of Days sits in judgment, and authority is transferred to the Son of Man. The beasts are temporary. Divine sovereignty is permanent. Revelation deliberately echoes and intensifies this pattern. John's beast is composed of lion bear, leopard suggesting continuity with Daniel's empires. It receives authority from the dragon, symbolizing spiritual opposition. It speaks blasphemies, persecutes the saints, and demands worship. The second beast enforces allegiance and creates an image that must be honored. The mark functions as a visible sign of participation within this system. When read together, Daniel and Revelation present a recurring theological archetype. Empire that claims ultimate allegiance becomes beast. The beast is not defined merely by geography or nationality. It is defined by posture toward God. Whenever political authority demands worship, suppresses faithfulness, and replaces divine allegiance with enforced loyalty, the beastly pattern is active. This framework clarifies the role of 666. The number represents the identity of the beast, within a historical context likely encoded in a way that first-century believers could recognize. Yet it also symbolizes intensified human imperfection. 6 falls short of 7. 666 represents the ultimate concentration of humanity, striving to occupy divine status and failing. The number is not mystical code detached from history. It is historically grounded symbolism. This pattern-based interpretation also explains why Revelation avoids providing simple, literalistic detail about the mark. Apocalyptic literature communicates through theological imagery. The mark mirrors the seal of God. Both represent allegiance. Both are covenantal signs. The division between the sealed and the marked is not technological, but spiritual and political. Daniel's courtroom scene reinforces an essential limitation. Beastly power is permitted, not ultimate. The Ancient of Days judges. The Son of Man receives eternal dominion. Revelation mirrors this progression. The beast dominates temporarily. The Lamb triumphs definitively. The dragon is bound. The new creation replaces the oppressive order. This trajectory prevents two common errors. The first is reducing the beast solely to ancient Rome, thereby flattening Revelation into past history with no ongoing relevance. The second is projecting the beast exclusively into a distant future, disconnected from its original audience. Daniel's pattern allows for both immediate and recurring application. Rome embodied the pattern. Other regimes may reflect it. Revelation's imagery remains relevant wherever power demands ultimate allegiance. With this structural foundation established, we are prepared to move forward. The next step is to examine how Revelation itself portrays final judgment and ultimate defeat of the beast, ensuring that our interpretation of 666 remains anchored in the book's full narrative arc, rather than isolated verses. Revelation does not introduce the beast in chapter 13 and then leave its fate unresolved. The book moves deliberately toward judgment. To understand 666 properly, we must follow the narrative through to its conclusion. Is the beast victorious? Is its mark permanent? Or is its authority temporary within a larger divine plan? Revelation 14 immediately follows the description of the mark with a contrasting vision. John sees the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who have his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. This is deliberate contrast. In chapter 13, the followers of the beast bear its mark. In chapter 14, the followers of the Lamb bear God's name. The imagery reinforces allegiance. Humanity is divided not by technology, but by worship. Revelation 14 also contains a direct warning. It states that if anyone worships the beast and receives its mark, he will drink the wine of God's wrath. This language underscores moral agency. The mark is not described as something unknowingly received. It is connected explicitly to worship. The text presents it as a conscious alignment with the beast's authority. The warning is theological and ethical, not technological. The narrative continues into Revelation 15 and 16, where bowls of judgment are poured out. The first bowl falls specifically on those who bear the mark of the beast and worship its image. This reinforces the covenantal nature of the mark. It identifies a group defined by allegiance. Judgment is not arbitrary. It corresponds to chosen loyalty. In Revelation 17, the beast reappears in association with Babylon, portrayed as a prostitute riding the beast. Babylon represents a corrupt economic and cultural system intoxicated with power and luxury. The beast supports and eventually turns against this system. The imagery deepens the pattern. Political power and economic corruption intertwine in opposition to God, yet both are destined for destruction. The climax arrives in Revelation 19. The beast and the false prophet are captured and thrown alive into the lake of fire. There is no prolonged cosmic struggle. There is no indication that the beast nearly triumphs. The defeat is decisive. The authority that appeared overwhelming in chapter 13 is exposed as temporary. This progression is critical. Revelation does not leave the reader in suspense about the beast's ultimate status. The mark does not grant eternal security within a new order. It aligns individuals with a system that will be judged. The Lamb's authority, not the beast's, is everlasting. At this stage, an important interpretive question emerges. If the beast's authority is temporary and repeatedly judged in Scripture's narrative arc, how should we understand modern attempts to identify the mark in specific technologies or political movements? In the next part, we will examine how the final judgment scenes shape responsible application today. When Revelation presents the destruction of the beast in chapter 19, it is doing more than concluding a storyline. It is establishing theological perspective. The beast that demanded worship, controlled economic participation, and persecuted the saints is captured and judged. The imagery is decisive and swift. The narrative does not describe prolonged negotiation or cosmic stalemate. The beast's apparent dominance dissolves under divine authority. This has direct implications for how the mark should be understood. If the mark represented an irreversible technological branding imposed upon unsuspecting individuals, the moral dimension emphasized throughout Revelation would collapse. Instead, the text repeatedly connects the mark with worship. Those who receive it are described as those who worship the beast in its image. The distinction between the sealed servants of God and the marked followers of the beast is theological before it is physical. Revelation 20 reinforces this division. John describes those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or hands. These individuals reign with Christ. Again, the criteria are worship and allegiance. The mark functions as a visible identifier of loyalty to an anti-God system. It is not described as accidental participation in ordinary commerce. It is associated with deliberate alignment. This observation challenges modern fear-driven interpretations. Across decades, various technologies have been labeled as the mark of the beast: credit cards, social security numbers, barcodes, biometric IDs, microchips, digital currency. Each generation identifies contemporary tools and assumes prophetic fulfillment. Yet Revelation itself does not describe such devices. It describes allegiance within a persecuting system. This does not mean Revelation lacks future relevance. It means that application must follow the text's pattern. The beast represents concentrated political power, demanding ultimate loyalty. The mark represents visible participation in that system. Whenever political authority demands worship like allegiance and suppresses faithfulness to God, the pattern intensifies. The form may change across eras. The structure remains consistent. The judgment scenes also establish limitation. The beast's authority is given and temporary. It operates for a measured time. The Lamb's reign, in contrast, is eternal. Revelation is structured to reassure believers under pressure. It reveals that oppressive systems do not have final authority. The mark does not secure lasting victory. It aligns with the doomed power. Another crucial point emerges from Revelation's narrative arc. The final chapters do not center on analyzing the beast's identity. They center on the New Jerusalem, the removal of tears, and the restoration of creation. The book's climax is not fear of 666. It is hope in God's final reign. Any interpretation of the mark that produces disproportionate fear without anchoring in that hope misaligns with Revelation's structure. Atistes. The interpretive framework is stabilizing. The mark signifies allegiance within a beastly system. The beast represents imperial power opposing God. Number 666 encodes human rebellion concentrated in political authority. The final judgment guarantees the system's defeat. In the next part, we will examine how early Christian readers would have heard these warnings and how that historical lens protects against modern speculation. To understand Revelation responsibly, we must ask how its first readers would have heard these warnings. Revelation was addressed to 7 churches in Asia Minor congregations facing real pressure under Roman rule. These believers were not speculating about distant technologies. They were navigating immediate tension between loyalty to Christ and loyalty to Caesar. In cities like Smyrna, Pergamum, and Ephesus, emperor worship was embedded in civic life. Temples dedicated to the emperor functioned as centers of political and social identity. Trade guilds often required ritual participation in honoring imperial authority. Refusal could result in exclusion from commerce, social isolation, or even persecution. The pressure was tangible. Allegiance was public. When Revelation described a beast demanding worship and restricting buying and selling to those bearing its mark, the imagery would have resonated immediately. It mirrored the lived experience of believers whose economic survival could depend on acts of civic worship. The mark symbolized visible alignment with the imperial system. Refusing the mark symbolized refusal to acknowledge Caesar as ultimate lord. This historical lens clarifies an important detail. Revelation was written as pastoral resistance literature. It was not coded to confuse its original readers. It was meant to strengthen them. By portraying Rome as a beast empowered by the dragon, John reframed imperial power as spiritually compromised. By presenting the mark as allegiance to that system, he warned believers about the cost of conformity. The warning in Revelation 14 declaring judgment on those who worship the beast and receive its mark would have carried immediate moral weight. It was not about unknowingly scanning a device. It was about whether a believer would publicly align with imperial idolatry to preserve economic stability. The mark represented capitulation under pressure. This does not limit Revelation to first-century Rome. It establishes its interpretive baseline. If we ignore how the original audience would have understood the imagery, we risk projecting modern fears into ancient text. Revelation's symbolism must first make sense in its historical context before being extended beyond it. Early Christian writings outside the New Testament also reflect this tension. Believers were often required to declare Caesar as Lord. Refusal could lead to punishment. Revelation's insistence that only the Lamb deserves worship directly challenged this imperial claim. The mark, therefore, symbolized acceptance of Caesar's ultimate authority over Christ's. Another detail reinforces this interpretation. In Revelation 13, the mark is associated with the name of the beast, or the number of its name. Names in the ancient world carried authority. To bear the name signified ownership and loyalty. This is mirrored by the servants of God bearing his name. The parallel is deliberate. The book presents 2 identities: those marked by allegiance to the beast, and those sealed by allegiance to God. This historical grounding does not eliminate future relevance. Instead, it anchors interpretation. The beast pattern can manifest whenever political systems demand ultimate allegiance in defiance of God. but the mark remains tied to worship and visible loyalty within that system. In the final part of this act, we will consolidate how historical context, prophetic pattern, and final judgment combine to define what 666 actually means. Without speculation, we can now bring together the narrative arc of Revelation, the historical context of its first readers, and the prophetic pattern inherited from Daniel into a unified interpretive conclusion. The beast is introduced as a political power empowered by the dragon. It demands worship, persecutes the saints, and enforces visible allegiance through the mark. The number 666 identifies the beast in a way accessible to first-century believers, likely encoding Nero Caesar while also symbolizing concentrated human rebellion. But Revelation does not end with the beast's dominance. It moves steadily toward judgment. The Lamb stands on Mount Zion. The followers of God bear his name. Warnings are issued against worshiping the beast. Bowls of judgment fall specifically on those who carry the mark. Babylon collapses. The beast and the false prophet are seized and cast into the lake of fire. The dragon is ultimately bound and judged. The narrative is deliberate and sequential. This sequence clarifies something essential. The mark aligns individuals with a system that is doomed. Revelation does not portray the mark as a neutral, administrative tool. It is covenantal and oppositional. It signifies loyalty to a power structure that elevates itself against God. The judgment scenes are not incidental. They define the meaning of the mark. It is not merely economic access. It is spiritual allegiance under pressure. The historical lens reinforces this. First-century believers would have recognized the pressure to conform to imperial worship. The mark imagery captured the visible sign of participation in that system. Refusal to participate could mean exclusion from trade or even death. The choice was costly and public. Revelation's warning was pastoral. Endure, remain faithful, do not compromise allegiance to the Lamb. The prophetic pattern from Daniel expands the framework. Beastly empires rise repeatedly throughout history. They centralize power, demand conformity, and often persecute dissent. The mark symbolizes visible participation in such systems when they demand ultimate loyalty. It is not random technology. It is not accidental compliance. It is conscious alignment with authority that substitutes itself for God. The number 666, therefore, carries layered meaning. Historically, it likely encoded Nero Caesar for John's audience. Symbolically, it represents intensified human imperfection and rebellion. Structurally, it identifies a system of authority that falls short of divine completeness. The 666 stands in contrast to divine perfection, which in Revelation is often symbolized by 7. When Revelation is read as a whole, fear-driven speculation loses stability. The text does not invite readers to scan the news for barcodes or microchips. It invites readers to discern allegiance. Who is Lord? Who receives worship? Who defines ultimate loyalty? The mark is the visible answer to those questions within a beastly system. At this point, the interpretive foundation is secure. We have examined the mark in context, the number in linguistic framework, the beast in Danielic pattern, and the judgment in narrative progression. The next step is to consolidate everything into a final, precise conclusion. What 666 really means, what it does not mean, and how to articulate that responsibly without speculation. After walking carefully through Revelation 13, Daniel 7, the historical setting of the Roman Empire, and the narrative arc of judgment in Revelation 14 to 20, we are now positioned to state clearly what 666 means within Scripture itself. First, 666 is explicitly described as the number of a man. Revelation 13:18 does not say it is the number of a system alone, nor the number of technology, nor the number of a mysterious future invention. It says it is the number of a man. The text instructs the reader to calculate it. This instruction assumes that the number corresponds to a name within a known numerical framework. In the first century world, Gematria allowed letters to carry numerical value. This makes the instruction coherent and historically accessible. Second, the most historically grounded calculation connects 666 to Nero Caesar when written in Hebrew letters. The existence of the 616 manuscript variant aligns with the Latin spelling of Nero's name, strengthening the likelihood that early readers recognized this coding. This does not require the beast to be limited exclusively to Nero. It indicates that John encoded the identity of a persecuting ruler in a way that believers could discern without openly naming him under imperial surveillance. Third, the number functions symbolically. In biblical literature, 7 often signifies completeness or divine perfection. 6 falls short of 7 when repeated 3 times. 666 may emphasize intensified incompleteness humanity, striving toward divine status, but failing. The beast claims authority, receives worship, and exalts itself, yet remains fundamentally human and imperfect. The number underscores counterfeit sovereignty. Fourth, 666 is inseparable from the mark. The mark is described as the name of the beast or the number of its name. This ties identity directly to allegiance. The mark is not described as an independent object. It represents visible participation in the authority of the beast. In first-century context, that participation would have been tied to imperial worship and civic loyalty. The number reinforces the identity of the power, demanding that allegiance. Fifth, Revelation's narrative structure positions 666 within a larger theological conflict. The dragon empowers the beast. The beast demands worship. The second beast enforces conformity. The mark identifies participants. Judgment falls upon those aligned with the beast. The lamb triumphs. The beast is destroyed. The number does not operate independently. It functions within this redemptive framework. At this point, we can responsibly affirm that 666 originally referred to a specific historical persecutor within the Roman system, most plausibly Nero Caesar, while simultaneously symbolizing concentrated human rebellion elevated to the level of divine pretension. The mark represents visible allegiance to that system of authority. In the next part, we will clarify what 666 does not mean according to the biblical text and address the most common speculative interpretations directly. If we are going to say what 666 means, we must also say what it does not mean according to the text itself. This step is essential, because throughout modern history, the number has been repeatedly detached from its literary and historical context and reassigned to whatever development appears threatening at the time. First, Revelation does not describe 666 as a barcode, serial number, or digital code embedded in commercial products. The text never references scanning, printing, ink patterns, or consumer labeling systems. The economic restriction described in Revelation 13 is not about product identification. It is about participation in a worship-aligned system. The restriction is social and covenantal before it is commercial. Second, Revelation does not describe the mark as a microchip, implant, biometric device, or technological insertion. The language used is symbolic and covenant. It echoes Deuteronomy 6 and Revelation 7. The mark stands in contrast to the seal of God. Neither is described in technological terms. Both represent allegiance. The text's emphasis is identity and loyalty, not hardware. Third, the mark is not presented as something accidentally received. Revelation repeatedly connects the mark with worship. Those who receive it are those who worship the beast and its image. The warnings in Revelation 14 are directed at individuals who consciously align themselves with the beast's authority. The text does not describe unsuspecting people being deceived into eternal condemnation by routine administrative compliance. The moral dimension is explicit. Fourth, Revelation does not identify 666 as a random future figure detached from first-century context. The instruction to calculate assumes immediate relevance. John wrote to 7 real churches under Roman pressure. The number needed to be decipherable within their linguistic framework. If 666 were exclusively referring to a 21st century political leader, unknown for 2 millennia, the instruction would have been meaningless to its original audience. Fifth, the number does not function independently of the beast. It is the number of the beast's name. It identifies a ruler or authority embodying anti-God power. The focus remains on allegiance to that authority. Modern speculation often isolates the number from its narrative context and assigns mystical significance disconnected from worship and political pressure. Revelation does not do that. This does not mean revelation lacks future implications. It means that application must follow interpretation. The beast pattern may manifest in various forms across history. Systems of power may demand ideological conformity. Economic participation may become tied to loyalty tests. However, the biblical text defines the mark in terms of worship and allegiance, not in terms of accidental exposure to technology. The danger of speculative interpretation is not merely academic error. It distorts pastoral application. Revelation was written to strengthen believers under persecution, not to create fear of consumer infrastructure. When the mark is reduced to technological paranoia, the ethical and theological weight of allegiance is diminished. At these days, the parameters are clearer. 666 is historically grounded, symbolically rich, and covenantly framed. It is not technological code divorced from worship context. In the next part, we will address whether Revelation anticipates a future climactic manifestation of this pattern beyond Rome, and how that possibility should be articulated responsibly. After establishing the historical grounding of 666 and clarifying what the text does not say, the remaining question is this: does Revelation anticipate a future climactic manifestation of the beast pattern beyond the Roman Empire? To answer that responsibly, we must examine how apocalyptic prophecy operates across Scripture. Biblical prophecy often functions in layers. Daniel's visions applied immediately to empires like Babylon and Persia, yet the pattern extended into later historical developments. The abomination of desolation in Daniel had a fulfillment under Antiochus IV, yet Jesus later referenced it in Matthew 24 in a context that extended beyond Daniel's era. This layered structure near fulfillment, combined with recurring or intensified future manifestation, is common in prophetic literature. Revelation itself suggests pattern escalation. While Nero plausibly fits the 666 calculation, the beast in Revelation is described with language that exceeds one emperor. Authority, obeyed every tribe and people and language and nation, suggests expansion beyond a single reign. The dragon empowers the beast in a way that echoes cosmic opposition, not merely local tyranny. The text intensifies Daniel's fourth beast imagery into a climactic confrontation. This suggests that Nero may represent a prototype rather than an exclusive endpoint. He embodied beastly authority in the 1st century. Later regimes have mirrored similar characteristics: centralized power, enforced ideological conformity, persecution of dissent, and demand for ultimate loyalty. Revelation's imagery remains relevant whenever such systems arise. However, relevance does not justify speculative identification. The text does not instruct readers to decode every political development as the final beast. Instead, it provides a theological framework for discernment. The beast is defined not by nationality or technological sophistication, but by posture toward God. When authority demands worship-like allegiance and suppresses faithfulness to Christ, the pattern intensifies. This distinction is critical. Revelation allows for future intensification without requiring constant re-identification. The mark represents visible participation in a system that replaces divine allegiance with enforced loyalty. If such a system reaches global concentration in the future, Revelation's imagery would apply naturally, but the text itself defines the criteria: worship, allegiance, persecution, and identity tied to the beast's authority. Another important boundary must be maintained. Revelation never presents the beast as equal to God. Its authority is given, its time is measured, Its defeat is decisive. Even in a future manifestation, the beast remains temporary. The Lamb's reign remains ultimate. Fear-driven interpretations that portray the beast as nearly unstoppable distort Revelation's theology. 34. A balanced articulation would state this. 666 historically encoded Nero Caesar and symbolized concentrated human rebellion, embodied in imperial power. The beast pattern may recur and potentially intensify in future manifestations of anti-God authority. The mark represents visible allegiance within such systems. The text does not specify technology, but it does specify worship and loyalty. In the final part of this master act, we will consolidate everything into a single precise summary statement. 666 really means according to Scripture and how it should be taught responsibly. After examining the text in sequence, anchoring interpretation in Daniel's prophetic framework, grounding the number historically in first-century context, and distinguishing between explicit data and speculation, we can now articulate a definitive and disciplined summary of what 666 really means according to Scripture. First, 666 is explicitly the number of a man. The instruction to calculate indicates that John expected his original readers to decode it within their linguistic framework. The most historically grounded identification aligns the number with Nero Caesar when written in Hebrew characters. The presence of the 616 textual variant reinforces that early Christians recognized the numerical correspondence. This places 666 firmly within the first-century Roman context, rather than in a distant, undefined future, detached from the original audience. Second, the number carries symbolic weight. In biblical symbolism, 7 represents fullness or completeness. 6 falls short. Repeated 3 times, 666 emphasizes intensified human incompleteness, elevated toward counterfeit perfection. The beast claims authority that belongs to God alone. The number underscores that this authority remains fundamentally human and deficient. It is concentrated rebellion, not divine equivalence. Third, the mark of the beast is inseparable from worship and allegiance. Revelation 13 introduces the mark only after describing enforced worship of the beast and its image. Revelation 14 warns those who worship the beast and receive its mark. Revelation 20 identifies those who refuse to worship the beast and refused its mark. The consistent thread is loyalty. The mark represents visible participation in a political or religious system that demands ultimate allegiance in place of God. Fourth, the beast pattern originates in Daniel 7. Empires rise, exalt themselves, persecute the saints, and are judged. Revelation intensifies this pattern in the Roman context and possibly anticipates future manifestations. Nero embodies the pattern historically, but the structure extends beyond him. The beast is the recurring archetype of imperial authority, opposing divine sovereignty. The mark is the visible sign of allegiance within that structure. Fifth, Revelation's narrative arc prevents fear-based distortion. The beast's authority is temporary and permitted. The Lamb's authority is eternal. The beast is captured and judged decisively. The dragon is bound. The new creation replaces the corrupt order. The book does not conclude with anxiety about 666. It concludes with restoration, reign, and the presence of God with his people. Therefore, a faithful and responsible articulation would be this. 666, originally encoded a first-century persecuting ruler, most plausibly Nero Caesar, while symbolizing concentrated human rebellion embodied in imperial power. The mark of the beast represents visible allegiance to such a system when it demands worship and ultimate loyalty. Revelation does not define the mark as technology, nor does it describe accidental participation. It frames the mark as a conscious alignment within a beastly political religious structure. This conclusion remains anchored in Scripture. It neither dismisses future relevance nor indulges modern speculation. It preserves historical grounding, symbolic depth, and theological proportion. At this point, we are ready to move toward the final act, where we will close the entire study by addressing how this understanding shapes responsible teaching today and how believers should think about allegiance in any age. After clarifying what 666 meant in its historical and prophetic framework, the next necessary step is application. Not speculative application, but responsible teaching grounded in the structure of revelation itself. If the mark represents visible allegiance within a system that demands ultimate loyalty in place of God, how should that shape how believers think in any era? First, revelation trains discernment, not paranoia. The book was written to strengthen churches under pressure. Its imagery was meant to expose the spiritual reality behind political authority. Rome presented itself as glorious, stable, and ultimate. Revelation unveils it as beastly when it demands worship. The lesson is not to fear infrastructure. The lesson is to evaluate authority through theological categories. When power claims what belongs to God, it becomes beast. Second, the mark functions as a warning about compromise. The economic pressure in Revelation 13 is real. Participation in trade required civic loyalty. Believers face tangible loss for refusing to conform. Revelation does not minimize that cost. Instead, it frames compromise as covenant betrayal. The mark symbolizes a choice between survival through conformity and faithfulness through endurance. The pastoral call is endurance. Revelation 14:12 summarizes this posture. Here's a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. The context is directly tied to the mark. Endurance is defined as refusing allegiance to the beast, even when pressure is intense. The emphasis is faithfulness, not deciphering technological codes. Third, responsible teaching must preserve Revelation's proportional emphasis. The book does not devote its climax to analyzing 666. It devotes its climax to the victory of the Lamb and the renewal of creation. When teaching about the mark becomes more dominant than teaching about Christ's reign, the balance of Revelation is distorted. The beast is temporary. The Lamb is eternal. Fourth, historical awareness prevents cyclical panic. Throughout history, believers have identified various developments as the mark of the beast, often with confidence and urgency. Yet each generation's identification has proven premature. This pattern itself demonstrates the danger of detaching Revelation from its first-century grounding. When the interpretive baseline is stable, panic decreases and discernment increases. This does not mean complacency. Revelation calls believers to vigilance. The beast pattern can manifest in various forms. Political systems can demand ideological conformity. Economic structures can pressure compromise. The mark imagery reminds believers that allegiance is never neutral. Worship is always directed somewhere. The question is not whether one participates in society. It is whether participation requires ultimate loyalty to something that replaces God. At this stage, the practical dimension becomes clearer. Revelation does not call believers to fear numbers. It calls them to evaluate allegiance. In the next part, we will examine how this understanding shapes engagement with modern political and economic systems, without collapsing into speculation. When applying Revelation to modern political and economic systems, the first rule is interpretive discipline. Application must flow from established meaning, not replace it. The mark of the beast originally addressed believers under Roman imperial pressure. That historical grounding defines the symbol's core meaning: visible allegiance to a power structure that demands ultimate loyalty in opposition to God. Any contemporary application must preserve that definition. Modern political systems differ significantly from first-century Rome, yet certain structural similarities can emerge. Governments may centralize authority. Ideologies may demand conformity. Economic participation may become conditioned on adherence to certain values or declarations. These dynamics can resemble the beastly pattern described in Daniel and Revelation. However, Resemblance is not identity. Responsible teaching avoids prematurely declaring that any single policy, tool, or technological advancement is the mark. The key criterion in Revelation is worship like allegiance. The beast does not merely administer commerce, it demands devotion. The image must be honored. The system seeks ultimate loyalty. When evaluating modern systems, the central question remains theological. Does this authority require allegiance that conflicts with faithfulness to God? If the answer is no, then labeling it beastly overextends the symbol. If the answer approaches yes, discernment becomes necessary but still measured. Economic participation in Revelation 13 is tied directly to worship compliance. Refusal to worship leads to exclusion from buying and selling. The text does not suggest that normal economic mechanisms are inherently beastly. It suggests that when economic survival is conditioned on idolatrous allegiance, believers face a moral crossroads. This distinction prevents conflating ordinary financial infrastructure with apocalyptic symbolism. Another important boundary involves technological development. Revelation was written in a world without digital infrastructure. The mark imagery is covenantal and symbolic. That does not mean future systems could not embody the beast pattern in technologically sophisticated ways. It means that technology itself is not the defining feature. The defining feature is coerced allegiance in place of God. History provides sobering examples of systems demanding ideological loyalty to totalitarian regimes that punished dissent, enforced propaganda, and restricted economic participation based on compliance. In such contexts, Revelation's imagery becomes pastorally relevant. Yet even in those cases, careful discernment is required. Not every strong government is beast. Not every ideological conflict is apocalyptic. The pattern is activated when ultimate loyalty is demanded and dissenters are marginalized for faithfulness to God. Revelation's primary pastoral goal was endurance. It reassured believers that oppressive systems are temporary. The beast's authority is given and measured. The Lamb's authority is everlasting. This theological proportion must shape modern teaching. When discussions of 666 produce more anxiety than assurance, the focus has shifted away from Revelation's intended outcome. At this point, the practical trajectory becomes clearer. The mark warns against ultimate allegiance to anti-God authority. It does not function as a code for tracking technological evolution. In the next part, we will examine how to teach this doctrine in a way that preserves urgency without generating speculative fear. Teaching about the mark of the beast requires theological precision and pastoral restraint. The subject carries emotional weight. For many believers, 666 evokes fear, mystery, and end-times anxiety. A responsible approach must reduce confusion without minimizing seriousness. Revelation presents the mark as a warning, not as a puzzle designed to induce panic. First, teaching must preserve narrative context. The mark appears within a sequence. The dragon empowers the beast. The beast demands worship. The second beast enforces allegiance, and only then is the mark introduced. Removing the mark from that structure distorts its meaning. It is not an isolated symbol. It belongs to a system defined by worship and loyalty. When this context is consistently emphasized, fear-based speculation loses credibility. Second, urgency must be defined biblically. Revelation's urgency is not about decoding the identity of every political leader. It is about perseverance and faithfulness. The repeated refrain in Revelation is here is a call for the endurance of the saints. The warning about the mark functions to strengthen resolve. It reminds believers that allegiance to Christ may carry cost. Urgency is moral, not technological. Third, teaching must avoid sensational cycles. Historically, each generation has identified a new mark. Social security numbers in the 20th century, barcodes in the late 20th century, microchips, and digital currencies in the 21st century. Each identification generated fear, yet none fulfilled Revelation's structural criteria of worship-based allegiance. under a beastly imperial system. Responsible teaching acknowledges this history to prevent repeating it. Fourth, clarity about symbolism strengthens confidence. Revelation is apocalyptic literature. It uses vivid imagery to communicate theological realities. The lamb is not literally a sheep. The dragon is not literally a reptile. The beast is not a zoological creature. These symbols represent real powers. The mark operates within that symbolic framework. Recognizing genre prevents literalistic misapplication. Fifth, teachers must anchor hope at the center. Revelation does not end with 666. It ends with 777 imagery, though. The number 7 is not repeated 3 times explicitly in that form. The symbolism of completeness saturates the book. The Lamb reigns. The New Jerusalem descends. God dwells with his people. If teaching about the mark overshadows teaching about restoration, the book's structure has been inverted. This balanced approach does not neutralize seriousness. Revelation's warning about worshiping the beast is severe. It speaks of judgment. It calls believers to discern allegiance carefully. But seriousness is different from speculation. The call is to faithfulness under pressure, not to fear of administrative systems. At this stage, we are nearly ready to close the study. In the final part of this act, we will consolidate how to articulate 666 responsibly in one precise statement that preserves history, symbolism, future relevance, and pastoral clarity. After tracing the historical context, prophetic structure, symbolic framework, and narrative arc of Revelation, we can now articulate how 666 should be taught in any generation without distortion. A responsible articulation must hold 4 elements together simultaneously: historical grounding, symbolic depth, recurring pattern, and theological proportion. First, historical grounding. The number 666 most plausibly encoded Nero Caesar for John's first-century audience. The instruction to calculate the number assumes immediate relevance. The manuscript variant 616 reinforces the likelihood of a name-based calculation. The mock imagery reflected real imperial pressure in Roman Asia Minor, where economic participation could be tied to emperor worship. Ignoring this historical layer removes the foundation of interpretation. Second, symbolic depth. 6 falls short of 7. Repeated 3 times, 666 represents intensified human incompleteness, elevated toward counterfeit perfection. The beast claims ultimate authority but remains fundamentally human and flawed. The number reinforces the theological message that rebellion cannot achieve divine status. It is dramatic symbolism, communicating spiritual reality. Third, recurring pattern. Daniel's beastly empires demonstrate that anti-God authority recurs throughout history. Revelation intensifies that pattern in Rome and potentially anticipates future manifestations. The beast is not confined to a single ruler. It represents concentrated political power, demanding ultimate allegiance. The mark signifies visible participation in such a system when it substitutes itself for God. Fourth, theological proportion. Revelation does not culminate in fear of 666. It culminates in the victory of the Lamb. The beast's authority is given and temporary. Its judgment is decisive. The New Jerusalem replaces Babylon. Any teaching that magnifies the mark more than the Lamb reverses Revelation's emphasis. When these 4 elements are held together, the result is clarity without panic. 666 is not a mystical code attached to modern consumer tools. It is not a random identifier that condemns unsuspecting individuals. It is not an isolated number detached from worship context. It represents the identity of a persecuting authority and a visible allegiance demanded within that system. The pastoral implication is straightforward. Believers are called to discern where ultimate loyalty lies. Revelation warns against systems that demand worship like allegiance. It reassures that such systems are temporary. It calls for endurance and faithfulness, even when economic or social pressure intensifies. With this consolidation complete, only one step remains: We will close the entire study with a final act that brings everything together in a concise definitive conclusion. What 666 really means, what it does not mean, and why Revelation's final message is hope, not fear. After tracing the historical grounding of 666, examining the linguistic calculation behind the number, anchoring the beast imagery in Daniel 7, and clarifying the pastoral function of endurance, we must now address the deepest theological layer in Revelation's presentation of the mark. The central issue in Revelation is not economics, not commerce, not technology, and not administrative systems. The central issue is worship. The mark only makes sense within that framework. From the opening chapters of Revelation, the throne dominates the scene. In chapter 4, John is taken into heaven and sees a throne set in place, and one seated upon it. The entire chapter is structured around worship. Living creatures and elders fall before the throne, declaring God worthy to receive glory and honor and power. In chapter 5, the Lamb appears and is declared worthy to open the scroll. The worship intensifies. Every creature in heaven and on earth joins in praise. The narrative establishes a theological center. Ultimate authority belongs to God and to the Lamb. Revelation 13 must be read against that backdrop. The beast is not introduced as a rival administrative structure. It is introduced as a rival object of worship. The text explicitly states that the whole earth marvels and follows the beast. It says they worship the dragon because he gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" This language deliberately mirrors worship language used elsewhere in Scripture to describe devotion to God. The beast does not merely rule, it receives adoration. The mark appears only after this worship dynamic is established. The second beast compels worship of the first. An image is erected. Refusal to worship carries consequences. Then the mark is introduced as the visible sign of participation in that worship alliance system. The sequence is not accidental. Allegiance precedes marking. The mark formalizes what worship has already declared. This covenantal dimension becomes clearer when we observe the parallel with the seal of God. In Revelation 7, the servants of God are sealed on their foreheads. In Revelation 14, the followers of the Lamb have his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. The language echoes Old Testament covenant imagery, especially Deuteronomy 6, where God's commandments are bound on the hand and forehead as signs of allegiance. Revelation deliberately constructs two rival covenant identities, those sealed by God and those marked by the beast. This structural contrast reveals the true theological stakes. The mark is not merely about commerce, it is about covenant belonging. It identifies which kingdom an individual ultimately serves. The beast represents a kingdom structured around power, coercion, and self-exaltation. The Lamb represents a kingdom structured around sacrifice, faithfulness, and divine sovereignty. The mark distinguishes visible participation in the former. This deeper theological architecture aligns with a broader biblical narrative. Throughout Scripture, the central conflict is allegiance. In Exodus, Pharaoh demands obedience that belongs to God. In Daniel 3, Nebuchadnezzar erects an image and commands worship under threat of death. The conflict is not infrastructure but idolatry. In Daniel 6, Darius issues a decree restricting prayer to himself. Again, the conflict centers on worship. Revelation intensifies these patterns into apocalyptic imagery, presenting the beast as the culmination of human authority, demanding what belongs only to God. Understanding this worship-centered structure protects interpretation from reductionism. When the mark is reduced to a technological device detached from worship context, the theological heart of Revelation is removed. The book is fundamentally about who is worthy of allegiance. The number 666 identifies the beast as concentrated human rebellion, masquerading as ultimate authority. The mark represents a visible conformity to that rebellion. At these stakes, the interpretive question deepens beyond historical identification. it becomes theological. How does Revelation define ultimate allegiance in contrast to ordinary civic participation? Where does legitimate engagement with society end and idolatrous conformity begin? In the next part, we will examine how Revelation draws that boundary and how believers are called to navigate it without collapsing into either fear or compromise. If Revelation frames the mark as covenantal allegiance within a rival kingdom, the next question becomes unavoidable. How does the book distinguish between ordinary civic participation and idolatrous conformity? The answer is essential, because Revelation does not call believers to withdraw from society entirely. It calls them to discern where ultimate loyalty lies. In the first century, Christians lived under Roman governance. They paid taxes. They used Roman roads. They participated in trade. They functioned within the empire's infrastructure. Revelation does not condemn these ordinary activities. What it condemns is worship of the beast and acceptance of an identity that replaces allegiance to God. The line is not drawn at citizenship, it is drawn at devotion. This distinction aligns with the broader New Testament. In Romans 13, Paul acknowledges governing authorities as instituted by God for order. In 1 Peter 2, believers are instructed to honor the emperor. Yet neither Paul nor Peter instructs believers to worship political authority. The boundary is clear. Respect and lawful participation are distinct from ultimate allegiance. Revelation intensifies that distinction under conditions where imperial authority crosses into divine claims. The beast in Revelation does not simply govern. It blasphemes. It demands worship. It persecutes those who refuse. The mark signifies visible compliance with that demand. Therefore, the dividing line is theological rather than administrative. When authority demands what belongs only to good ultimate loyalty, worship, moral redefinition, participation becomes compromise. This helps clarify modern confusion. Participation in economic systems, use of currency, digital identification, or civic structures does not automatically equate to receiving the mark. Revelation does not frame ordinary commerce as inherently beastly. It frames coerced allegiance as beastly. The mark appears only after worship alignment is established. The economic restriction enforces loyalty. It does not define it. Another critical detail in Revelation is intentionality. The warnings in chapter 14 are directed toward those who worship the beast and receive its mark. The sequence is consistent. Worship leads to marking. The moral decision precedes the visible sign. This means the mark is not portrayed as an accidental trap. It is covenantal identification with a rebellious authority. This theological boundary also protects against overreaction. If every strong government or controversial policy is labeled beastly, discernment collapses into paranoia. Revelation calls for wisdom, not constant alarm. The instruction to calculate the number assumes careful thought. The call for endurance assumes steady faithfulness rather than impulsive panic. At the same time, Revelation refuses complacency. When authority crosses the boundary into demanding ultimate allegiance that contradicts faithfulness to Christ, believers must choose. The mark symbolizes that choice. It is the visible alignment with a kingdom structured in opposition to God. This layered framework respect for civil order, refusal of idolatrous allegiance forms the interpretive guardrail. It prevents both extremes, naive submission and reactionary fear. The Lamb's authority remains ultimate. Earthly authority remains provisional. In the next part, we will explore how this worship-centered understanding of the mark reshapes modern discussions about end times fear and redirects attention toward faithful endurance. When Revelation is read through the lens of worship and allegiance rather than through the lens of technological fear, the emotional tone of the book changes. Instead of producing constant anxiety about hidden codes or future devices, it produces clarity about faithfulness under pressure. The mark becomes less about deciphering infrastructure and more about discerning devotion. Throughout history, discussions of 666 have often generated cycles of fear. Each generation identifies new developments as potential fulfillments: political leaders, international organizations, financial systems, technological innovations. The pattern repeats. Yet Revelation itself anchors the mark within worship of the beast. When fear becomes detached from that context, interpretation drifts. The book's structure consistently redirects attention toward endurance. Revelation 13 describes persecution and pressure. Revelation 14 follows with a call to perseverance. Revelation 15 to 16 portray judgment. Revelation 19 presents decisive victory. The narrative does not leave believers in suspense about whether the beast will ultimately prevail. It assures them that oppressive systems are temporary. This structure matters for pastoral stability. If teaching about the mark emphasizes uncertainty and threat without anchoring in Revelation's assurance of victory, the book's trajectory is reversed. The Lamb stands at the center of the throne. The beast is judged. The dragon is bound. The new creation replaces the corrupted order. Fear-driven speculation often isolates chapter 13 from chapters 19 to 22, creating imbalance. Another stabilizing factor is the recognition that Revelation portrays identity. The sealed servants of God are marked with his name. The followers of the beast bear its mark. Both are covenantal signs. The imagery communicates that allegiance shapes identity. The question is not how to avoid accidental marking, but how to remain faithful in visible loyalty to Christ. This perspective reframes modern anxiety about inadvertent participation in complex systems. Revelation does not depict individuals unknowingly condemned by bureaucratic mechanisms. It depicts individuals consciously aligning with worship that contradicts devotion to God. The emphasis is moral clarity, not hidden traps. At the same time, Revelation warns that compromise can be gradual. The churches in chapters 2 and 3 are warned against accommodation. Some tolerate false teaching, some compromised under pressure. The mark imagery intensifies that warning. It represents full alignment with the system opposed to God. The call is vigilance in worship and faithfulness in identity. This vigilance does not require withdrawal from society. Early Christians continued living, working, and participating within Roman culture. Their resistance centered on worship. When commanded to confess Caesar as Lord in a way that denied Christ's lordship, they refused. The mark symbolizes that decisive boundary. As we approach the final part of this act, one theological insight becomes central. Revelation is less concerned with predicting technological developments and more concerned with preserving undivided allegiance to the Lamb. The next section, we will consolidate that insight into a final structural statement about what 666 ultimately reveals about loyalty in every age. After examining the historical grounding of 666, the prophetic structure from Daniel, the symbolic framework of Revelation, and the pastoral implications of worship-centered allegiance, one final theological consolidation becomes clear. The mark of the beast ultimately reveals a principle that extends beyond one empire, one ruler, or one era. Every generation faces the question of ultimate loyalty. Revelation is structured around two thrones. In chapter 4, the throne of God dominates heaven. In chapter 13, the beast is granted a throne by the dragon. These two thrones represent two rival centers of allegiance. The mark identifies which throne a person ultimately serves. It is covenantal identity within a kingdom framework. The beast's kingdom is built on coercion, pride, and counterfeit authority. The Lamb's kingdom is built on sacrifice, faithfulness, and true sovereignty. The number 666 intensifies that contrast. It represents concentrated humanity attempting to claim divine status while remaining fundamentally incomplete. The beast speaks arrogantly. It exalts itself. It demands worship, yet it remains 6 short of 7. Tripled 6 underscores intensified deficiency. The number does not communicate mysterious power. It communicates counterfeit completeness. The mark formalizes participation in that counterfeit kingdom. In Revelation S imagery, it is visible, not hidden. It represents a public alignment. The text does not portray it as accidental, invisible, or technologically subtle. It is the outward sign of inward loyalty. That is why it parallels the seal of God on the foreheads of the faithful. Both are covenant identifiers. This theological structure reframes modern discussions. The mark is not primarily about the mechanics of future commerce. It is about the posture of worship. Revelation consistently presents worship as the dividing line between kingdoms. In chapter 14, those who worship the beast receive judgment. In chapter 15, those who conquer the beast sing the song of Moses and the Lamb. Worship determines destiny. Understanding this worship-centered architecture prevents two distortions. The first is minimizing the seriousness of the warning. Revelation does not trivialize allegiance. The second is exaggerating speculative fear. The text never invites readers to obsess over infrastructure. It invites them to remain faithful under pressure. The recurring pattern from Daniel reinforces this. Empires rise, exalt themselves, persecute dissenters, and fall. Each beastly manifestation demands loyalty beyond its rightful scope. Revelation reveals the spiritual dimension behind that pattern. The dragon empowers rebellion. Yet judgment is certain. The Ancient of Days presides. The Son of Man reigns. Therefore, the deeper theological meaning of 666 is not mystery but exposure. It exposes the nature of human power when it seeks divine status. It exposes the fragility of systems that appear invincible. It exposes the necessity of clear allegiance. With this theological consolidation complete, we are now prepared to move into the final act of the study. In Act 8, we will close the entire investigation by summarizing precisely what 666 really means, what it does not mean, and why Revelation's ultimate message is not fear but faithfulness and hope. We began this study with a clear objective: to determine what 666 really means according to the Bible, without speculation and without importing modern fears into an ancient text. After moving carefully through Revelation 13, Daniel 7, the historical setting of the Roman Empire, the linguistic structure of Gematria, the worship-centered framework of Revelation, and the final judgment scenes, we are now positioned to state the conclusion with clarity and proportion. First, 666 is described explicitly as the number of a man. Revelation instructs the reader to calculate it, implying that the number corresponds to a recognizable name within a first-century numerical system. The most historically grounded interpretation identifies the number with Nero Caesar. When written in Hebrew characters, the presence of the 616 manuscript variant reinforces that early Christians recognized a name-based calculation. This firmly situates the number within its original historical context. Second, the number functions symbolically. 6 falls short of 7, a number often associated with completeness in biblical symbolism. Repeated 3 times, 666 emphasizes intensified human incompleteness. The beast presents itself as ultimate authority, worthy of worship and loyalty. Yet it remains fundamentally human and deficient. The number communicates counterfeit sovereignty, human power, striving to occupy divine space. Third, the mark of the beast is inseparable from worship and allegiance. Revelation does not introduce the mark in an economic vacuum. It introduces it after describing enforced worship of the beast and its image. Those who receive the mark are those who worship the beast. The mark formalizes visible participation in a political system that demands ultimate loyalty in place of God. Fourth, the beast imagery is rooted in Daniel's pattern of beastly empires. Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome represent recurring manifestations of concentrated political power that exalts itself and persecutes the saints. Revelation intensifies that pattern. Nero likely embodied it in the 1st century, but the structure extends beyond him. The beast represents the archetype of imperial authority claiming divine prerogatives. Fifth, Revelation's narrative arc prevents fear-driven distortion. The beast's authority is temporary and permitted. Its time is measured. Its defeat is decisive. The Lamb reigns eternally. The New Jerusalem replaces Babylon. The book culminates not in anxiety about 666, but in restoration and divine presence. When these elements are held together, the meaning stabilizes. 666 originally encoded a persecuting ruler within the Roman system, most plausibly Nero Caesar, while symbolizing concentrated human rebellion elevated toward counterfeit divinity. The mark represents visible allegiance within that system of power. In the final part, we will close with the ultimate implication of this conclusion, how believers should think about allegiance in any era and why. Revelation's final message is one of hope rather than fear. After examining every relevant layer, historical, linguistic, prophetic, symbolic, and pastoral, the final implication of 666 becomes clear. Revelation is not primarily a book about decoding hidden technology. It is a book about discerning allegiance under pressure. The mark of the beast is not introduced as a mysterious device that traps unsuspecting people. It is introduced as a visible sign of loyalty within a system that demands worship in place of God. The number 666 identifies the beast as concentrated human rebellion embodied in political authority. In its original context, it pointed to Nero Caesar and the imperial system persecuting believers. Symbolically, it represents intensified human incompleteness, masquerading as divine sovereignty. Structurally, it belongs to the recurring biblical pattern of beastly empires that exalt themselves and are judged. This conclusion reshapes how Revelation should be read in any age. The central question is not what new technology might fulfill this prophecy. The central question is, where does ultimate loyalty lie? Revelation presents to rival kingdoms. The Lamb stands at the center of heavenly worship. The beast demands earthly allegiance. The mark identifies participation in the latter. Throughout history, believers have faced pressure to conform to systems that redefine truth, demand ideological loyalty, or suppress faithfulness. Revelation speaks into those moments. It does not instruct believers to withdraw from society. It instructs them to remain faithful when authority crosses into idolatrous territory. The dividing line is worship. The mark, therefore, is best understood as covenantal identity within a rival kingdom. It is a visible alignment with authority that claims what belongs only to God. In the first century, that alignment involved emperor worship. In future manifestations, the form may differ, but the defining feature remains constant: coerced allegiance in opposition to Christ. Revelation's structure guards against both panic and complacency. Panic distorts the text by detaching it from context and projecting fear onto every development. Complacency ignores the warning that allegiance matters. The balanced posture is endurance, faithful loyalty to the Lamb, regardless of pressure. The book ends not with the beast triumphant, but with the beast judged. The dragon is bound. Death is defeated. The New Jerusalem descends. God dwells with his people. The final chapters shift attention away from the mark and toward restoration. Revelation's ultimate message is not anxieties about 666. It is assurance that counterfeit power is temporary and divine sovereignty is eternal. If this structured, text-driven investigation helped clarify what 666 really means and what it does not, consider liking the video and subscribing for future long-form biblical studies. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And one final question tied directly to tonight's study. After examining the full context, do you see 666 primarily as a historical code, a symbolic representation of human rebellion, a recurring empire pattern, or a combination of all three? This concludes our full biblical investigation of the mark of the beast and the meaning of 666.